We live in an age overflowing with information, yet starving for wisdom. Every second, our phones buzz with headlines, opinions, and endless distractions. It feels like knowledge is everywhere. But strangely, true thinking, deep, clear, rational thinking, is vanishing before our eyes. This paradox should disturb us. How is it that with more access to learning than any generation in history, people seem less capable of independent thought? Why does collective stupidity, mob outrage, and blind agreement dominate the culture? And what would a philosopher like Seneca, writing nearly 2,000 years ago, say about this strange decline? Seneca once warned that nothing is more foolish than to follow the crowd. He understood something most people never pause to consider. The majority is almost always wrong. Not because people are unintelligent individually, but because together they abandon reflection. When you merge into the collective, when you surrender your own reasoning for the comfort of agreement, you stop being a thinker and start becoming an echo. And echoes may be loud, but they never create, they only repeat. Think for a moment about how we live now. Social media dictates what is popular, trending, acceptable, or unacceptable. A single idea can go viral, not because it is true, but because it is loud. People share without reading, argue without reflecting, and join mobs without questioning. It's not wisdom spreading, it's noise. And this noise is drowning out the voices of reason. This is what I call the rise of collective stupidity. A stupidity that doesn't come from a lack of intelligence, but from a refusal to use it. Seneca, living in the chaos of Rome, saw a similar problem. The Romans had endless spectacles, gladiator fights, gossip, parades, all designed to keep people entertained, distracted, and united in shallow excitement. Most citizens didn't want to reflect on virtue, discipline, or the meaning of life. They wanted distraction. They wanted to be part of the crowd. Seneca despised this because he saw what it did. It stole individuality, silenced reason, and replaced reflection with amusement. Doesn't that sound like our world? Replace gladiators with viral trends, and Rome becomes TikTok, YouTube Shorts, endless streams of dopamine. The problem is the same. The crowd chooses entertainment over truth. What is critical thinking, after all? It is the simple act of questioning, asking, is this true? Why is this happening? What evidence do I have? What if the opposite were the case? It's the courage to not take things at face value. Yet today, the habit of questioning has been replaced with the habit of scrolling. We consume, we react, we repeat. We let algorithms decide what we see, who we trust, and what we believe. Instead of shaping our minds, we outsource them. Instead of wrestling with difficult questions, we choose quick answers. And slowly, the muscle of critical thought grows weak. Seneca would say that this weakness comes from our surrender to pleasure and ease. He believed that wisdom requires effort, solitude, and discipline. To think critically is to endure discomfort. It means sitting with uncertainty instead of rushing to a conclusion. It means daring to disagree when everyone else agrees. And it means turning away from distractions so you can hear your own mind. But most people fear solitude. They fear silence. They fear standing apart. So they run to the comfort of the crowd. The crowd tells them what to think, and they obey. But here's the danger. Once you stop thinking for yourself, you are no longer free. You become vulnerable to manipulation, to propaganda, to emotional control. Look at how outrage spreads online. One accusation, one rumor, one manipulated video, and suddenly millions are repeating the same opinion without even knowing the facts. People don't stop to ask, is this true? They just join the swarm. The Stoics knew this danger well. They warned that a mind without reason is a slave, not a slave to a master with chains, but to impulses, to emotions, to the mob. Imagine Rome in Seneca's time. Tens of thousands packed into the Colosseum, cheering as men fought and bled for entertainment. The crowd loved it, demanded it, celebrated it. And Seneca, sitting in his study, wrote about the madness of following the masses. He knew the games were barbaric. But to the crowd, they were normal. To question them was to risk ridicule. To refuse them was to stand alone. That is the true challenge of critical thinking. It isolates you. It forces you to step away from the crowd and risk being misunderstood. Now look at our world. The Colosseum is digital. The games are scandals, celebrity drama, political shouting matches, and shallow entertainment. And millions of us watch, comment, and share thinking we are informed, when in fact we are simply distracted. Seneca would shake his head and remind us, the crowd is rarely right. Wisdom belongs to those who step aside and ask, why am I watching this? What value does this bring to my soul? Does this make me a better human being? And most of the time, the answer will be no. Why is critical thinking disappearing? Because it is harder than conformity. It takes courage to think for yourself. It takes humility to admit you might be wrong. It takes strength to remain calm when everyone else is outraged. And it takes discipline to turn away from noise and choose silence. Most people will not do this. Most people will prefer the ease of going along. And so collective stupidity spreads, not because people are dumb, but because they are lazy. Seneca knew this well. He wrote, "The crowd is the greatest danger to a wise man." Notice he didn't say the crowd is dangerous to fools. They're already lost. He said the crowd threatens the wise. Why? Because the pressure to conform, to blend in, to avoid standing out is overwhelming. Even strong thinkers risk being pulled down by the masses. Like a swimmer caught in a current. If you don't fight, you'll be carried away. And once you are carried away, it is very hard to return. This is why we must guard our minds. We must practice the art of questioning, of slowing down, of not rushing into the latest outrage or trend. We must, as Seneca advised, live according to reason, not the mob. Because a life lived in conformity is not really your life. It belongs to the crowd. And when you surrender your mind to the crowd, you surrender your freedom, your individuality, and your soul. So here we are, in a world that celebrates information, but despises wisdom, a world that prizes noise but punishes silence, a world that rewards conformity but mocks independence. Critical thinking is disappearing because we allow it to. We trade it for comfort, for speed, for the approval of strangers. And the cost is higher than we realize. Because when a society stops thinking, it stops growing. When individuals stop reasoning, they become tools, not humans. And when collective stupidity rises, civilizations fall. This is why Seneca's voice still matters. He calls across the centuries, reminding us, don't trust the crowd. Don't surrender your judgment. Don't mistake popularity for truth. His warning is not just for Rome. It is for us, right now. Because if we don't protect our ability to think, we will lose it. And once it is gone, what will remain? Just noise, just crowds, just a civilization that had every tool for wisdom, but chose stupidity instead. Seneca once wrote that the surest sign of a weak mind is a man who follows the opinion of the crowd. He didn't mean that everyone else is always wrong, but that truth is rarely found where rushes blindly together. Most of the time, the majority follows not what is true, but what is easy, what is comfortable, what is entertaining. And this is as true today as it was in ancient Rome. If you want to see collective stupidity in action, simply look where people gather in great numbers, online or offline, and you will find passion, excitement, and noise. But wisdom, that is always scarce. Why is this the case? Because the crowd is intoxicating. To follow the herd feels safe. There's a certain comfort in blending in not questioning, in having others confirm your opinion before you've informed it. Human beings are tribal by nature. We fear being cast out, being different, being alone, and so, to avoid that fear, we surrender our judgment. We exchange our ability to reason for the comfort of belonging. This is the psychology of herd mentality. The mind whispers, if everyone is saying it, it must be true. If everyone is doing it, I should too. But Seneca, like the other Stoics, warned us that truth is not decided by numbers. 1,000 fools agreeing on something does not make it wise. 1,000,000 people repeating the same slogan does not make it just. 1 billion clicks on a video do not make it valuable. Numbers are not proof of truth. They are proof of popularity, and popularity, Seneca would remind us, is often the enemy of wisdom. Consider how most of us consume information today. We see what is trending, what is recommended by algorithms, what our friends are sharing. Rarely do we stop and ask, who created this? Why is it being shown to me? What agenda might it serve? Instead, we assume that if everyone is talking about it, it must be important. And so we join in. This is the rise of collective stupidity. Not because people are incapable of thought, but because they refuse to pause long enough to engage in it. The Stoics saw this long ago. Epictetus said that when you want to improve, you must be willing to be laughed at, to be ridiculed, to stand apart from the crowd. And Seneca lived this truth. While Rome shouted about politics, drama, and spectacle, he spent his mornings in silence, reflecting on virtue, on time, on death. While others rushed to the games to lose themselves in noise, he chose philosophy to sharpen his reason. That choice was not easy. It meant isolation, even mockery, but it also meant freedom. He did not let the crowd dictate what he thought or who he was. And this is where we must confront an uncomfortable truth. Critical thinking is painful. It doesn't feel good to question everything. It doesn't feel safe to go against the grain. It requires courage to ask, what if they are all wrong? Because the moment you ask that, you are no longer protected by the safety of numbers. You stand alone, and standing alone is terrifying. This is why so many people avoid it. They would rather stay in the warmth of the crowd than feel the cold of solitude. But solitude is where wisdom is born. Seneca believed that the mind must retreat often, away from the noise, into silence. Only in silence can you hear your own reason. Only in solitude can you see clearly what the crowd cannot. He compared the crowd to a storm. It tosses you about, fills your ears with chaos, blinds your vision. To step aside is to find calm waters where thought can actually take place. Yet today, most of us fear silence more than anything. Left alone with our thoughts, we reach for the phone, the feed, the endless scroll. We prefer the chaos of the crowd over the clarity of solitude. Why is this so? Because distraction is easier than reflection. It is easy to watch, to scroll, to share. It is hard to sit quietly and ask yourself hard questions. Reflection requires effort. Distraction requires nothing. Reflection brings discomfort. Distraction brings pleasure. And human beings, unless they train themselves otherwise, will always choose pleasure over pain. Seneca knew this. He said that the man who seeks comfort above all else will never be free, because he will always be a slave to his desires. Now let's draw a parallel between ancient Rome and today. In Rome, the gladiatorial games served as the ultimate distraction. Thousands packed into the arenas, losing themselves in the bloodshed and the spectacle. They weren't there to think. They weren't there to reflect on virtue or morality. They were there to escape themselves. And Rome fell deeper into decay as its people lost the ability to think beyond bread and games. Does this sound familiar? Today, the games are endless entertainment. Scrolling feeds, gossip channels, drama accounts, viral scandals. We aren't killing gladiators, but we are killing time. And as Seneca would remind us, killing time is killing life itself. Here's what's most dangerous about herd mentality. Once you're inside it, it feels right. It feels natural. You don't notice you're surrendering your mind. Like a fish in water, you don't notice the current carrying you along. You only realize it when you try to swim against it, and suddenly you feel the force pushing back. This is why people who try to think differently often feel resistance, even hostility from the crowd. Because the herd despises anyone who refuses to move with it. Your independence is a threat. Your refusal to agree shines a light on their laziness. And so, to protect the illusion, the crowd tries to silence you. Seneca was not naive about this. He knew the cost of independence. He himself lived under the dangerous reign of emperors, who demanded loyalty and punished dissent. He knew that to speak truth in a war that worships lies is to risk everything. Yet he still wrote that the wise man does not live according to the opinion of the crowd, but according to the laws of reason. He understood that true freedom is not granted by society, but claimed by the individual who refuses to surrender his mind. Think about that for a moment. True freedom is not wealth, not status, not popularity. It is the ability to think for yourself when everyone else demands conformity. It is the ability to stand in silence while the crowd screams. It is the ability to resist the intoxicating pull of collective stupidity and remain grounded in truth. That is freedom, and that is exactly what is disappearing in our world today. The rise of collective stupidity is not an accident. It is the result of millions of individuals choosing ease over effort, distraction over discipline, conformity over courage. And every time we surrender in this way, we feed the herd. We make it stronger, louder, more powerful, until eventually the voice of reason becomes a whisper, drowned out by the roar of the crowd. But Seneca reminds us that the whisper is enough. If we listen, wisdom doesn't need numbers. Truth doesn't need the approval of the crowd. One mind that thinks clearly is worth more than 10,000 that echo blindly. The Stoics understood that progress begins with the individual, not the masses. If you can guard your own mind, you've already done something rare. If you can resist the crowd, you've already become extraordinary. So the question becomes, are you willing to stand apart? Are you willing to endure the discomfort of solitude, the pain of questioning, the courage it takes to say no to the herd? Because if you are art, then you will inevitably be absorbed by collective stupidity. And the tragedy of that is not just that you lose your individuality. It's that you lose your humanity. You become less a thinker and more a repeater. Less a person and more a shadow of the crowd. This is why Seneca's wisdom is not some dusty relic of the past. It is a lifeline. It is a warning. It is a challenge to us, living in a world drowning in noise, to choose reason over reaction, solitude over noise, wisdom over conformity. It is to remember that the crowd is always there, always tempting, always pulling. But the path of the philosopher, the path of the critical thinker, is to resist. Because in the end, the crowd will always be loud. But wisdom does not need to shout. Wisdom needs only one mind, willing to listen. If Seneca could step into our world today, he would be astonished. Not by our technology, not by our skyscrapers or machines, but by something far more dangerous. The way we drown ourselves in innocence, yet starve ourselves of wisdom. He would see people carrying entire libraries in their pockets, with access to more knowledge than all of Rome combined. And yet he would see them unable to reason, unable to focus, unable to stand still with a single thought. He would shake his head and say, "This is not wisdom. This is waste." Because knowledge without reflection is nothing. Information without judgment is noise. The first great cause of disappearing critical thinking is overload. Information overload. We scroll through endless feeds, headlines, statistics, and opinions. Each one pulls our attention for a second, then another, then another. The mind is never still. But here's the problem. A mind that is constantly bombarded cannot process, cannot reflect, cannot think. Seneca warned about this 2,000 years ago when he wrote that it is not the shortness of life that troubles us, but the waste of it. We waste our lives chasing 1,000 things, when only a few truly matter, and what is true for time is also true for thought. We waste our thoughts on 1,000 fragments, never staying long enough with one idea to understand it fully. Think about how most of us read today. We skim headlines, half-read articles, glance at comments. Rarely do we sit with a single book, a single essay, a single argument, and wrestle with it until we understand. Instead, we snack on information. And just like someone who snacks all day but never eats a proper meal, our minds grow bloated but malnourished. We are full of facts, but starved of wisdom. The overload has killed our depth. And when depth dies, critical thinking dies with it. But information overload is only one cause. The second is even more dangerous: emotional manipulation. Look around at the media, at politics, at advertising. Almost everything is designed not to make you think, but to make you feel. Outrage, fear, envy, desire. These are the levers being pulled. Why? Because emotions bypass reason. They shut down the slow, careful process of critical thinking and replace it with impulsive reaction. The moment you are angry, you stop asking questions. The moment you are afraid, you stop analyzing. The moment you desire something, you stop judging clearly. Seneca saw this too. He wrote that the greatest danger to the mind is being a slave to your passions. Anger blinds, fear paralyzes, desire corrupts. The Stoic path was to master your emotions, to rule them instead of being ruled by them. But look at our world today. We have built entire systems designed to trigger outrage and desire. Social media algorithms reward what makes us react emotionally, not what makes us think rationally. A calm, reasonable argument will never spread as fast as a scandal, a rage-filled rant, or a shocking headline. And so, little by little, we are trained to react instead of reason. We become conditioned to outrage. And a society addicted to outrage cannot think clearly. The third cause is education. But not education as it should be. Education as it is. Schools and universities teach us how to memorize, how to repeat, how to pass tests. But rarely do they teach how to question, how to reason, how to think critically about the world. We are taught what to think, not how to think. Seneca criticized this in his own time when he said that many men learn not for life, but for school. Knowledge that does not serve the soul, that does not strengthen reason, is wasted. And yet this is exactly what we do. We produce people who can recite facts, but cannot form judgments. We produce specialists who know details, but not wisdom. And here's the result: a society filled with educated people who cannot tell truth from propaganda, reality from illusion, wisdom from noise. They have information, but no compass. Seneca would call this tragic, because the purpose of learning is not to fill your head. It is to sharpen your judgment. It is to train the soul, and without that, education becomes just another source of arrogance, not wisdom. The fourth cause, and perhaps the most subtle, is the comfort of agreement. This is the silent killer of independent thought. Human beings crave belonging. We want to be accepted, validated, praised. And so, without realizing it, we begin to shape our beliefs, not according to reason, but according to the approval of others. We say what we think people want to hear. We post what we know will get likes. We avoid opinions that might upset the crowd. And slowly we stop asking ourselves, is this true? And start asking instead, will this be accepted? Seneca knew this weakness well. He said that the man who seeks to please the crowd has already lost himself. He becomes a mirror, reflecting what others want, instead of a lamp, shining his own light. The comfort of agreement is dangerous because it feels good to have others nod, to have others cheer, to have others praise. This is a powerful drug. But like all drugs, it comes with a cost. The cost is your mind. The cost is your independence. The cost is the death of critical thinking. Think about how hard it is to say something unpopular today. Even when you know it is true, even when you have reason on your side, you hesitate. Why? Because you fear the backlash, the ridicule, the silence of disapproval. And so you keep quiet, and in that silence, collective stupidity grows stronger. Because when the wise stay silent, the fools grow louder. Put all these causes together: overload, manipulation, shallow education, comfort of agreement. And what do you get? A world that looks intelligent on the surface but is deeply foolish underneath. A world where people can quote statistics but cannot reason. A world where people can react instantly but cannot reflect deeply. A world where the crowd grows louder while wisdom fades into whispers. Seneca would not be surprised. He would remind us that civilizations have always faced this danger. Rome, too, was filled with people who knew gossip better than philosophy, who knew entertainment better than truth, who knew how to shout but not how to reason. And Rome fell, not because it lacked knowledge, but because it lacked wisdom, not because it lacked power, but because it lacked discipline. And our world, for all its brilliance, walks dangerously close to the same path. What, then, is the solution? Seneca would not tell us to run from the world. He would not say to smash your devices or reject education. No, he would tell us to use them wisely, to master them instead of being mastered, to read less, but deeper, to consume information not for entertainment, but for growth, to train the mind not in facts, but in judgment, to have the courage to stand apart, even if it means being alone. He would remind us that wisdom begins not in the crowd, but in solitude, not in agreement, but in questioning, not in comfort, but in discipline. The rise of collective stupidity is not inevitable. It is simply the natural result of neglect. If you do not train your body, it grows weak. If you do not train your mind, it grows lazy. And a lazy mind surrounded by a noisy crowd will always fall. But if you choose to discipline your mind, to question, to reflect, to resist, then you can stand tall even in the midst of madness. Because in the end, the crowd will always exist. The noise will always tempt. The comfort of agreement will always whisper. But the question is, will you think for yourself, or will you let the crowd talk for you? The answer to that question will decide not only your life, but the life of the civilization you belong to. For as Seneca knew, when enough people stop thinking, whole nations collapse. But when even a few dare to resist, wisdom survives. If all of this sounds dark, if it feels like critical thinking is vanishing, and the rise of collective stupidity cannot be stopped, then remember this. Seneca never believed the crowd had the final word. The individual always had the power to resist. The Stoic way is not to despair at the madness of the world, but to sharpen your own mind so that you are not swallowed by it. The world may choose noise, but you can choose silence. The crowd may choose conformity, but you can choose reason. Others may surrender, but you can still stand. Seneca's advice for us today would be surprisingly practical. He would say, guard your time, for wasted time is wasted life. Guard your mind, for once corrupted, it is hard to reclaim. Guard your solitude, for it is the furnace in which wisdom is forged. And above all, question everything, not with cynicism, not with arrogance, but with calm, patient reflection. Ask, is this true? Who benefits if I believe this? What does this teach me about life? Will this still matter a year from now, or is it just noise? These simple questions are the beginning of freedom, but wisdom is not built on questions alone. It requires practice, Seneca would urge us to build habits that strengthen the mind, just as exercise strengthens the body. One of the simplest habits is journaling, writing down your thoughts each day, forcing yourself to reflect, to analyze, to wrestle with your own beliefs. Another is reading deeply, not widely. Instead of scrolling through 100 shallow takes, sit with one profound book, one timeless idea, one challenging essay, until you understand it. Quality over quantity, that is how thought grows. Another habit is limiting the noise. The world will never stop shouting, but you can choose when to listen. You do not need to check every headline, read every comment, follow every argument. Seneca himself said that we must withdraw from the crowd at times, not because we hate them, but because we wish to return stronger. The mind needs space. Just as a field cannot grow crops if it is never allowed to rest, the mind cannot grow wisdom if it is never allowed to be silent. And then there is the most difficult practice of all, the courage to stand apart, to disagree, to be silent when others scream, to say no when everyone else says yes. This is a true test of critical thinking, because thought without action is incomplete. It is easy to sit alone in your room and write reflections. It is harder to live those reflections when the crowd demands you abandon them. But Seneca would say, if your philosophy cannot guide you in the marketplace, in the forum, in the chaos of life, then it is not real philosophy. It is just words. True wisdom must be lived. So how do we live it? By refusing to be carried by the current, by daring to ask questions even when they are unpopular, by judging a thing not by its popularity but by its truth, by reminding ourselves that the crowd is loud but rarely right, and by training our minds each day, through reflection, solitude, and discipline, to see through the illusions of the age. Remember, collective stupidity rises when individuals surrender. But if even one person resists, the spell is broken. Wisdom does not need the approval of the majority. It does not need applause. It does not need a pardon. It simply needs one mind willing to stay clear, calm, and courageous. And that one mind can inspire another and another until the whisper of reason becomes stronger than the roar of the crowd. This is why the responsibility is personal. You cannot save the world from stupidity. You cannot force others to think, but you can guard your own mind. You can live in such a way that you are not fooled, not manipulated, not swept away. And in doing so, you keep alive the flame of wisdom that civilizations desperately need. Seneca believed that the wise man is like a lighthouse. He stands firm, he shines quietly, and even if the ships ignore him, he remains, a symbol of clarity in the storm. That is what each of us must become. Imagine if more of us lived like this. Imagine a society where people questioned instead of reacted, reflected instead of scrolled, sought wisdom instead of popularity. Imagine a culture that valued silence as much as noise, depth as much as speed, truth as much as entertainment. It would be a different world, a stronger world, a freer world. But it begins not with the world. It begins with you. The crowd will always be there. The noise will always tempt. But you are not powerless. You can choose. You can decide today to think more deeply, to question more carefully, to reflect more often. You can decide to read one great book instead of 100 shallow posts. You can decide to spend 1 hour in silence instead of 1 hour scrolling. You can decide to seek truth, even if it costs you popularity. And those small decisions, repeated daily, are how wisdom is born. Seneca would ask you one final question. Will you live by reason, or will you live by the crowd? The choice is yours, and it is not a small choice. It is the difference between freedom and slavery, between wisdom and foolishness, between a life that is yours and a life that belongs to the mob. The rise of collective stupidity may be powerful, but it is not inevitable. because you, right now, have the power to resist. So, take back your mind. Guard it, sharpen it, discipline it, and let the crowd do what it will. They may shout, they may laugh, they may drown themselves in noise, but you'll stand apart. You will think, you will live as Seneca urged, not by the opinion of others, but by the light of reason. And in that choice, you will find a freedom no crowd can ever take away.